Welcome to the last panel discussion, and I think the last meeting in this room, maybe. So we got another very great panel. Last night I did a 7-person panel discussion. Right now, we're going to talk about this topic with are hybrid clouds the best path towards IT transformation? So that's the topic. There's a lot of folks, obviously listen to clouds. They have multiple data centers, filling up to the ceilings and floors and having a lot of problems with that. And the data is just adding to the problem, the increase in data. And folks are moving to cloud just to say, I don't want to build another data center. And sometimes, some folks say, oh, just, create more private clouds or make an addition and a special network into a public cloud, and that's my private cloud. Or how is a hybrid, half of my workloads here integrated in one way, workload mobility. So we're going to have a lot of issues to discuss. And I'm going to first go through the panel and have them introduce each other. Introduce each.
Well, let's see.
That'll be nice. Yes. Never mind. Boy, it's not even late in the day here. So introduce themselves and their company, and then we'll go on to moving on to the hybrid clouds. Go ahead. You want to start from there?
Sure, thanks. I'm Andrew Hillier. I'm the CTO and co-founder of a company called CiRBA. We do what we call automated capacity control. It's really deep analytics that looks at all the supply and demand in an environment, virtual cloud, on-prem, off-prem, and says, where do I put things and how big do I make them, essentially. So workload placement, routing, reservation, and it's really designed to drive up efficiency, drive down risk, and help make these kinds of decisions around what is the best place to host my workload.
Okay.
Great. Glad to be here. I'm Paul Turner, actually from Cloudian. Cloudian makes storage for your on-premise enterprise storage, but it actually provides a hybrid capability to actually be able to burst data up to the cloud. So you can actually have a hybrid storage capability with on-premise and public cloud storage capability, all managed under the one single namespace. Fully S3 compliant interface, which means you can build standard apps. You can take your S3 apps, run it on-premise, or decide to run them up in the cloud when you're ready. And I think it will be really interesting as we go through the talk today. I think you're going to see more of this bursting and movement on apps.
Hi, I'm Courtney Behrens. I'm from Brother International, the company that you know for printers and scanners and sewing machines. And we now offer cloud services. It's under the umbrella of Brother Online. We have both public and privately hosted cloud services, so a hybrid deployment model there. And so I'm the senior manager of the group, and so I'm here to bring a business perspective to the hybrid cloud discussion.
Brilliant. Michael Elliott, Enterprise Cloud Solutions for Dell. You know us for servers, storage, networking, but you also probably know us for private clouds, helping customers build private clouds, as well as partnering to gain access to the public clouds and being able to manage all those workloads throughout all those cloud infrastructure.
I'm Kurt Hagerman. I'm the CISO for FireHost. We are I'll call us a specialty cloud hosting provider focused on high security and high performance hosting. So we're focused on serving customers in the regulated data space and have several options. We sort of privatized a public cloud infrastructure, and that's how we offer some of the security that we do.
My name's Randall Poole. I'm with QTS, and we're a full-service managed data center provider. So we do everything from custom data center, co-location, and then cloud services as well. So our portfolio has customers that's doing, actually within our data center walls, some hybrid capabilities as well.
Gordon Haff in Cloud Product Strategy at Red Hat. You probably know us for our open source Enterprise Linux or JBoss middleware. We're also very involved with OpenStack, with our OpenShift platform as a service, and with hybrid cloud management cloud forms.
Okay, so my first question is going to be, how do you define the cloud journey of a CIO? And are they going to, start thinking of, hey, eventually we're going to move totally to a public cloud? What is the journey, and where does hybrid cloud play a role? How do you see, the hybrid looking? Is it going to be under multiple data centers, one data centers? I just want you to start talking about that journey and, moving to, eventually a public off-premise. So that's, Gordon, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, we take a very broad view of hybrid, including software as a service, infrastructure, platform as a service. Our belief is that for most organizations, there's going to be continuing to be some type of on-premise capabilities, but we also believe hybrid in some way, shape, or form is, for at least for organizations above a certain size, is pretty much inevitable.
Yes, I mean, I would agree. I think they're for years ahead of us. I think there's still going to be some private cloud scenarios because, in my mind, the whole thing is about having the right app at the right location, right? So there's certain workloads that's going to stay private, but as companies grow and they need to scale, we'll see more and more hybrid. So I think that's the direction is the hybrid piece. It'll be several years before it all goes directly in the public.
Okay, so just to let you know, by the way, before this we had a panel discussion of a CIO. I don't know how many of you sat in here, but he said in 2010 he had got rid of his whole data center. So I know a lot of people have not gotten that same path. So I want to talk about those kinds of companies who have not reached that stage yet, but are in the process. So,
well, right? I think I'll add in a little here. I mean, I sit with a lot of major companies, major financial banks in New York and London, where we've sat down and we've talked to them, and a lot of them are under security concerns, regulation concerns. They can't move all their data, but what they would like to do is be prepared for moving to the cloud. And so I think what you're going to see is more common application development paradigms develop between on-premise and the cloud. You're going to see ability to do data bursting, where you're able to actually move data to the cloud a little more seamlessly in managing that. So I think we are going to be hybrid. Bets are all off in 20 years' time whether the world ends up all cloud. It could, but I think we're going through an evolution right now, and through that evolution, we've got to make it easy to actually manage on-premise and cloud services and manage them together. And I think data is key to that.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think hybrid is an inevitable solution. Large enterprises have a lot of legacy applications that. I mean, there's still a lot of applications on mainframes and other platforms that aren't going away anytime soon. There's a lot of applications that just require the low latency of being local. But, the reality is that the amount of data that they have and the applications that they're developing, they don't have the room to store them in their own premise. They don't have the desire anymore with the competitiveness and the economic difficulties that we've faced. They're looking to lower their costs, and the only way to really do that, and actually more specialized. Most of the enterprises are not at the heart IT companies or security companies, so they're going to look for the expertise that exists outside their walls as a way to help expand their footprint without having to do it themselves.
Yeah, and I'll echo a little bit of that. I mean, legacy architecture is not going away, but most new applications being built out there are being built for a cloud environment, whether that exists on a private cloud or whether that exists on a public cloud. So most of the large enterprises I go out and have conversations with, they want to protect this legacy architecture, but they want to take advantage of what the public cloud provides. And that's going to be for them the path of how do I start building this private cloud that interacts with the data that's going to be out there, whether it's software as a service, but in general the public cloud, and make that work for me versus working against me and something I have to support.
Yeah, and I think now's the time to look at governance as well. So when you're looking at all of your legacy infrastructure and looking towards the future of what type of cloud deployment models are going to make sense either from an infrastructure or services standpoint, how is IT going to manage that? Because how many hundreds of cloud applications exist in your companies today that you don't even know about? If IT can take back that control at a governance layer, then you're going to be maintaining not just the cloud infrastructure, but you can have a more strategic role in the cloud services deployment within the whole company.
Yeah, and I'll add a slightly different twist. We talk a lot about the considerations like the data, latency, security. I find it interesting that a lot of people treat this as a kind of an opinion, whereas there is an exact science to this. If people describe their demands adequately and say this is exactly what it needs to run in this geography, it needs to be close to this feed, it needs this kind of storage, you can scientifically determine whether it can run here or there. And it's not really an opinion, it's whichever one makes the most business sense. So I find a lot of discussions center around, do you think, or you ask an organization, do you think you're going, or we want to go hybrid? Well, it's not really an emotional question. At some level, it is a scientific thing that I think the industry will evolve to say, we're just going to decide this based on analytics and make that decision.
So one of the things I consider when I look at hybrid clouds is, you have either multiple data centers or some on a private, some on a public, and there is a big issue of network bandwidth whenever you're going to connect two pieces in multiple places. How do you see, what considerations do people have to look at when I'm going to hybrid? There's a lot of written about data gravity. How much of data is sitting in one place? Is it easy to move those or not? How do you connect them? All that. Tell me your thoughts on what are the challenges, especially on the network side, on the bandwidth side, on what's going to be working, what's not going to be working. You want to start from this side?
Sure. Yeah. Interestingly, we work with some very large partners on these different scenarios, and we've done some research around it. And I'll offer a perspective in terms of bursting, because that's kind of obviously you can dig an app and with enough effort move it somewhere, but can I move it very quickly? And everybody focuses on kind of second-to-second bursting to scale out, and that might work for some apps, but for an awful lot it doesn't. And what we find is that there are other approaches like seasonal bursting. Like it might make sense to say, for Q3, I'm going to get some more external capacity and use it, but I'm going to be very diligent. I'm going to make a project of using it and then give it up after I'm done. So it comes down to, like you said, it's the data, the bandwidth, this all drives the decisions. But if I can't project the data out fast enough to start spinning things up remotely for a certain type of app, that it won't make sense. But I might still be able to do it on a longer time frame. So it's all about the time frame. Just how fast it happens, over a century, then you can do anything as far as moving out to the cloud. And that's really what it comes down to, which apps are able to do that, which ones aren't, or which ones have to stay internal forever, or which ones are very easily put out.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's actually a great point. It's not the immediacy of movement. Yes, data has gravity. Data takes time to move. So I think what you will see is two kind of pieces. We see people deploying hybrid cloud where they have a set of storage internally and they actually want to be able to move archive and backup data to the cloud. That's still a hybrid cloud service, and yet they can manage that as they tier data off to the cloud, and asynchronously you kind of compress and move data off to the cloud, which is what we see customers doing. The other is, you go through a planned application movement. You decide that actually I've built my application, it's contained properly. I'll take that machine image. Now let me move that whole machine image up into the cloud and actually now bring up a whole set of new instances, and then they will run and create their data and run locally in the cloud. So I think what you'll see is portability of the application infrastructure, and the container model. That will be portable. And also data will be archived and backed up, and you'll see that merge of data into the cloud as well. But they're kind of planned. That all has to be managed. I think there's a lot of work we have to do on management ecosystems to manage a seamless IT infrastructure of both public and private cloud. And I think there's a lot of work to do in that space. But I think those are the two places you'll do. It won't be immediately moving data. I mean, that's not possible.
And one of our core services for Brother Online is web and video conferencing. So we're extremely concerned with the bandwidth in our customer locations. And what we've seen is that a lot of companies didn't plan ahead far enough when they either moved into their facilities or built their new infrastructure, and that the current pipes into their building can't handle web and video conferencing, which is a little shocking in this day and age. But when you're going to be planning for the future in terms of those things, you have to involve all of the business units and really understand not just what does IT see as a need or predict as a future need, but understand all of the major projects or models that may be coming across all business units that you can pre-plan and help build out to support everything the business is going to do.
Okay.
Echo, applications are built and being built right now to be extremely portable, but it's the databases, the underlying databases that are the issue. And what we're starting to see with customers is what I'll call disaster recovery .2, where they're starting to replicate data off into the disaster recovery site, which is really becoming a colo site, where if there's an issue with bandwidth or transport into their main center, their ability to turn up that other center, the databases are being replicated and come up very quickly. We're starting to see a lot of interest and a lot of action around those types of scenarios.
Is it still only in the interest phase, or there are some real things?
There are some real things. One of the major sports programs, that's how they're operating now, where they can turn up. They have VMs sitting on their disaster recovery site. Mm-hmm. All data is replicated over to that. If there's a disaster, whether they can see it coming, it's easy to turn it up, or immediate, it, they can start turning up VMs at that disaster recovery site and lose minutes, only minutes of data.
I'll just quickly add in, we have a large media company who's working with us who needs to stream media content out to a lot of media outlets, a lot of other news outlets. And they're pushing to basically their own kind of data center servers. They're also pushing it up to Amazon. So all of that service is available, and they can actually burst and turn up new services from Amazon when they need to. Most of the time, they want to deliver the services from their own data centers, but they are ready, and they're replicating the data. Yep. Effectively, they're just using multi-copy replicas to move the data around.
I think there's two things. I mean, bandwidth is where it is. I mean, it's increased tremendously. The ability to have, I get 40 megabits a second on my phone. I mean, that was unheard of 5 years ago. I mean, you used to have to buy a T3 to get, anywhere close to that kind of bandwidth, and those were hugely expensive. And now we get it for $30 a month on our phone. But I think there's a couple of things: application architecture and data architecture. So some of the technologies around data sharding and the ability to more easily replicate data and distribute data and have the applications more sensitive to operating in a replicated and a distributed fashion will help make those things, make those applications easier to distribute in the cloud. And then to go off of his comment, we have a lot of customers who are no longer looking at at disaster recovery. They're looking at business continuity. They're looking at how can we ensure that our business stays operational, because we do know that there are going to be disastrous events. We had Nemo and Sandy up here in the Northeast. You look at the weather that's been going on across the midsection of the country with lots of tornadoes and all kinds of other things. We have a lot of customers that are implementing essentially hot sites using data replication technologies where they don't worry about it. If one of our locations gets hit by an F5 tornado and goes offline, they don't care because their data and their applications are operating in another location. But I do think that there need to be progress needs to be made in the data replication and application design phases to better facilitate that kind of an operational
I'm seeing that a lot. You're talking about people are more thinking about disasters and what's going to happen. Are you seeing that more geographically in perhaps places like Florida or some place which are hit?
We're
seeing Japan was very interested in that after the tsunami.
Right.
They were very interested in saying, even if we have an 8-hour downtime, we want to go to a totally out of region and come up. That was part of what they built into their business, because they said we cannot be sure that something else happens at some point of time, and we're going to have to. So where are you seeing that kind of things?
So we see a lot of demand for disparate geographic locations, and that exacerbates the problem of bandwidth. I mean, if you're going to do it East Coast, West Coast, or you're going to do, European and U.S. or other kinds of scenarios, you've got that built-in, speed of light latency that you have to contend with. And I think it makes it more important to look at locations of data centers and making sure that you have locations that are in areas that have lower risk to disaster type scenarios. But even with that, it's very unlikely that two areas of the country are going to be hit at the same time with some sort of an ultimate disaster. I mean, if we get to that point, we're all going to be worrying about a lot of other things as opposed to whether our applications are up and running.
So I'll stay on the DR path a little bit longer, because I think, historically everybody talked about DR, but I think cloud and hybrid cloud is actually bringing it to fruition, right? It's making it affordable, so they're actually moving in that direction. And I'll echo some of the other thoughts. Replication that was really driving DR is also helping to get that data in sync between multiple locations.
Okay.
The technology's been pretty amazing recently.
Yeah, I mean, I think going to a slightly higher level here, what we kind of see is that CIO or IT really almost becoming more like portfolio managers or brokers of services. Now, in some cases, as portfolio managers, they may very well say, we really are not in the business of running data centers, and we really will move things to software as a service, to public clouds as much as possible. In other cases, it's going to be really having a mix of on-premise software as a service, public cloud infrastructure. And one of the decisions, one of the trade-offs we'll need to make is software as a service, for example. Wow, this really adds a lot of value to our operation. We're not going to be too portable, though. We're going to be kind of locked into that vendor, but maybe that's okay here. Maybe something else is really kind of a short-term project, so we're okay if that's not something we can replicate and move forever. For other more strategic assets, they might very well say, want this to be able architecturally to run in a public cloud or a private cloud, but we want a common, for example, operating system infrastructure certifications that allow us to run in either place. So I really see the IT departments really having to sort of govern this entire process.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, because I advise a lot of companies, if they say that they want to move to the cloud, I say, first look if there is a software as a service solution, and can you just shut down everything and just move to a software as a service solution. That kind of brings a whole hybrid situation. You got some things that you're consuming from software as a service, some things that you have custom built in-house. How do you see that all being managed together, in a way that you can manage the security aspects, some things that maybe, the orchestration layer that you might have to think about what you're going to do to bring all these pieces together. A lot of it is integration driven. And do you see some trends, products going there to meet that kind of a software as a service, in-house or hosted or kept somewhere as a custom solution? So we'll start from that side.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this comes down to this whole idea of everything has an API.
Okay.
So even if, I think the sort of pre-API, and arguably one of the problems why ASPs didn't ultimately succeed, was they really were islands and your data was locked into those islands. If you decide you want to move off Salesforce, you're going to have some work, but at least you can move your data off. And if you do need to extend that software as a service, you have APIs that let you do so. So I think that's not the only ingredient, but it's one of the critical ingredients.
Yeah, and also I think you'll see a transformation where, IT departments are more brokers of services, right? So they've got to get more familiar with the services that, SaaS providers provide, IIS service provides, and internally. So they've got to blend that together. So there's a big transformation that's got to happen in the IT department as well. And then the single pane of glass, which is the holy grail on top of it, right?
Yeah, I think we're a ways off from that single pane of glass.
Holy grail.
You start looking at the different kinds of services and software as a service. Typically, you have no control over the infrastructure at all. You're consuming a service. I do think it's going to head more that way. I mean, it's happened already in the consumer space. We all have phones again with thousands of apps, millions of apps. There's literally an app to let you do whatever you want to do, and do you really care what's behind it? I don't. When I download an app, do I really understand the inner workings and how they're delivering it and what their infrastructure looks like? No, I'm just expecting the service to work. It's kind of like when you go home and you flip the light switch on, you expect the electricity, you expect your light to go on. You don't worry about the chain of how that electricity got to your house. And so there's so many different models, IaaS and PaaS and software as a service and the internal stuff. I think you'll start seeing some convergence like you are in the cloud space with cloud control panels, and they all drive off these APIs. If you're going to be in the cloud services business, if you don't have full RESTful APIs for your tools, people aren't going to use you because they can't integrate you into that. But I think there's still a ways from trying to get it all together because there's just not a commonality. Enough. I mean, especially when you talk about security, software as a service, you have to do that due diligence up front and make sure that you believe that the controls they've put in place are adequate to meet your needs, because you're not going to have any control over it. You do on the infrastructure as a service side and PaaS and some of the stuff that you do internally. So, yeah, I think that's where the challenge is how do you get more visibility?
Okay.
One of the things we're also seeing and running into is, the APIs and the applications and the calls they make, how they work in certain cloud infrastructures and certain cloud systems don't work exactly the same in somebody else's cloud system. So when we think about the portability, all of a sudden now I have to rewrite that. So that as we go into and think about hybrid clouds, will those applications work the same in my environment as they're going to work in that cloud environment?
Yeah, I mean, you said before, or somebody did, that IT should begin to act as brokers of IT cloud services, and I think that's true, but the step before that is they should be a strategic member of every business unit, because they shouldn't just be a broker that's going to then deploy the services that the business unit says, this is what I want, but they should also be able to push back and say, here are the ones that we recommend based on our infrastructure as well as your business needs.
Yeah, I think we've talked about IT as a broker of services. It's not just application services that they need to become a broker of. They need to actually be a data broker too. They actually need to understand where are the assets of the enterprise. Which IT services am I using? Which cloud service am I using? Where is my data? How do I make sure I can always get my data back or I can move my data out? And so that whole data fabric, where you actually understand not just what applications I may be using in different services, but I also understand where all my data is, and I'm able to actually have portability of that data, movement of that data. I think that's the next piece that we really need to get right. Because it's right now, the brokering looks more like a kind of Apple phone store, right? It's just a set of applications, and they're certified applications by the IT department who say they're okay services. The real danger is your data's out there. You've got to actually make sure the assets of the enterprise are still well protected, and I think that's a big piece.
Yeah, and I think along with that is also, I'll go back to a supply and demand view. One thing we find some of our bigger customers doing is saying, we're going to kind of decompose, it's like the broker concept, but going almost further, saying we're going to separate supply and demand entirely and recouple them in a different way. So the providing of capacity and how I consume that are allowed to be separate. And that really sets you up to say, well, now I can substitute that supply for other supply because that's more modular at that point. So we find that it's very important that no matter what you're doing, internal, external, hybrid, you have a handle on all your demands. Those come from you. You have to deal with them in some way, and now the decision of how you deal with them, whether it's internal or external, becomes up to you. But if that's all entangled, even from an organizational perspective, we see one of our big banking customers organizing around supply and demand organizations just for that purpose. So they can basically make that abstraction, have a different relationship between the two, and the demand side may be closer to the line of business. They may understand the demands better. Because the other thing we see is that if a line of business is asking for capacity, they may not even know what to ask for. They don't ask in demand terms, they ask in supply terms because they're asking for CPUs because they don't know how to express that. So that starts to clean all that up and makes a very clean supply and demand picture, which is it's almost supply chain theory. It's almost stepping back and saying, I want to do this properly.
Okay, so we got a few minutes left. We all agree that we are going to have a, hybrid cloud is one of the major ways in which you're going to go towards a whole transformation. It's not going to be turning switches off and moving on unless you're a really small company with, 2 servers in some closet sitting somewhere.
Well, if you're a small company, you never bought the server.
Exactly.
In the first place. You went straight to the cloud.
That is true.
Yeah.
So Valvi, I think, can you give some advice to those moving on the journey? What are the biggest challenges while they put some resources on-premise, off-premise? Is it security? Is it integration? Is it bandwidth? Those are the kinds of things, and what are the best practices to go? I'll start in the middle and then start going backwards from each side on to the outside. How did that start?
Well, how did we get to Linux? We got to Linux, and we had AIX and Solaris and all those, but how did we get to Linux? Steps. We looked at what kind of applications can work in there. Oh, I trust it. Same with virtualization. We put tier 3 applications out there and we virtualized them. Then we moved up to tier 2 and tier 1. The same journey as it goes to cloud. What are my applications that have the least amount of dependencies that I can start potentially moving out into the cloud that I'm not as concerned about, gain experience from that, and then start the journey from there.
So connect, ones which have least connectivity, least dependency, the best ones to start moving and then figure out how.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing out there.
Got it. Want to go on that side?
Sure. Yeah, I completely agree. So I think it's looking at the services and the applications that you're using, understanding what's mission critical and what's not, what could sit in a public cloud and what should be a little more secure and dedicated. And then understanding the data load and how much data is going to sit against each of those applications, and building your hybrid cloud by really segmenting the applications that way. And then also some kind of integration between your clouds, because if you're going to have all of these data silos, then it really defeats the entire purpose of a hybrid cloud.
So come this side now.
Yeah, I think a lot of it starts with, we talk about application. I think it really starts with data and understanding what data you have, the sensitivity of that data to your organization, the relative risk appetite that the organization has for having that data be in someone else's control and being able to map that. So you have to map your data and then understand, okay, great, now I've started at the data level. Now what applications are operating on that data? Because if you start it based on saying, this is really highly sensitive data, it may be an internal app that's easy and low risk from an application perspective, but you don't want that data outside your walls to begin with. So I think it's going to start more with understanding your data and starting with less sensitive data, and looking at how you want to move that data out there, and then the rest will, I think, follow from that perspective.
Want to go that way?
Yeah, a way to think about this, and it's something that I actually came from NetApp, and we went through a whole effort to look at how are we actually going to use hybrid clouds, how are we going to use on-premise, and what do we use for cloud services. And they basically looked at core versus context. What's my core? What's established? What makes me a company? What's critical services that I must own and run? And I will make sure that they are run by me and really well controlled, and they're critical assets for my business. Context ones, whether it's HR applications or any of those, all of those should go to cloud services. So think of core versus context. And then look at how do you change your IT, how do you simplify your IT organization if you just start mapping everything into that? And then look at those ones that are core. Look at how can you actually maybe do data services for them so that you can actually do archive and backup for those things to the cloud. But for anything that's context, get rid of it. It should be in a cloud services, should be running inside in a service provider, and I think it will end up there.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with everyone. I mean, look at applications that's not core to you, Exchange, things of that nature. Nobody wants to manage mail anymore, right? So, that's a quick thing to outsource. Not easy, but it's a good thing to kind of push out to the cloud. And also new applications. I mean, if you're bringing up a new app that's more of a standalone app, get it in the cloud.
Okay, that edge.
Yeah, I think these are all good points on the technical front. You can look for low-hanging fruit and the opportunity to do that. I would also add, though, that financially it has to make sense. So in any transformation, we see people, it doesn't make sense to move off a server that's still on the books. I mean, if you're still paying for it but not using it, even using public capacity doesn't make sense if you still have internal capacity that's already paid for, even if it is more expensive technically. So it all has to make financial sense. When we look at the low-hanging fruit, what to go after first, oftentimes let's go for the biggest financial gains, because that's how you're going to then fund the rest of the project. So some things are technically easy, but they may not give you much return.
So lots of good advice. So I'm going to answer slightly differently, that pay attention to your users. Because if you build something and it's not as good as what they can get by just going to Amazon with their credit card, guess what? Your developers, your other users are simply going to whip out their credit card and get a SaaS, or they're going to go to Amazon, and you've just wasted a whole bunch of money and time.
Okay, you said credit card or crack card? Okay.
Depends on where you are.
With that, we had a great panel here. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your good observations on hybrid cloud. Give them a hand. And thank you all for your participation, especially in this big room. So now the rest of the sessions are in the breakouts, and you got